Have you ever looked at someone who's just crushing it, building this massive, towering legacy and wondered, what did they have that I don't? Well, you're in the exact right place. Today, in this explainer, we are absolutely tearing into the foundation of human drive, the architecture of agency and achievement. We're going to explore the psychology of success, what personal agency actually means, and frankly, the complex and sometimes uncomfortable realities behind how we measure a life well lived. Let's get right into it.
Look at this quote. Winners define themselves by what they made happen. Unhappy and unsuccessful people define themselves by what happened to them. Man, that is a massive, incredibly definitive hook right out of the gate. It literally demands your attention. But I want you to really sit with it for a second. Do you actually agree with this harsh binary? It's intense, sure. It's super motivational. But as we're going to see, it also sets up a philosophical battleground that requires us to take a much, much deeper look.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the winner's mindset.
To really ground our understanding here, we need to define agency. It's all about taking responsibility for your actions and actively shaping your life. This right here is the absolute bedrock of that so-called winner's mindset. It's the belief that you are the architect of your life, not just some brick being laid by somebody else. You hold the pen, you write the story. Having agency essentially means you're accepting the heavy burden of responsibility in exchange for the awesome power to steer the ship.
Which brings us to Section 2, agency versus victimhood.
And this brilliantly illustrates two completely opposing approaches to navigating life's inevitable challenges. It's a really stark contrast. On one hand, you have agency. You're the active shaper. You make the choices. You're the one physically moving the pieces on the board. And on the flip side, you have victimhood, seeing yourself as a completely passive victim of circumstance. In this framing, things just sort of happen to you, right? The weather's bad, the boss is unfair, the market is down, and you're just a leaf blowing in the wind of all these external events.
Digging one layer deeper into that dichotomy, the practical application of agency means locking your focus entirely on what you can actually control. The controllables, things like your efforts, your decisions, and your responses to adversity. The traditional winner's approach ruthlessly cuts away any energy spent worrying about the uncontrollables. Like a sudden economic downturn or a rainy day totally ruining your outdoor event. Instead, you're pouring 100% of your mental bandwidth into your own actions and your own attitude.
But we kind of have to stop and ask the obvious question. Is success really that simple? I mean, is life genuinely just a clean, perfectly balanced equation where your input directly equals your output? As much as we all love a good, punchy motivational slogan, we really need to pump the brakes here and shift our perspective a bit.
And that leads us to Section 3, the oversimplification problem.
Because let's be real, attributing success or failure entirely to individual agency is a deeply misleading oversimplification of a highly complex world. External factors play a massive, undeniable role in shaping outcomes, things like your socioeconomic background, your access to resources, and systemic inequalities. These elements literally create incredibly varied starting lines and totally different obstacle courses for different people. For example, growing up in a zip code with exceptionally funded schools versus one without, that drastically alters your baseline access to resources from day one. So the rigid binary of just work harder doesn't always accurately map onto the complex reality of how these external forces actually operate in society.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds into redefining success. Once we acknowledge that the starting line just isn't the same for everybody, we have to critique the very labels we use to measure achievement. The terms winners and losers themselves can be highly problematic. Why? Well, because the reality is that success is entirely subjective and multifaceted. If external factors heavily influence our outcomes, then judging a person's entire worth based on a single metric, like say their job title or the size of their bank account, is fundamentally flawed. It's pitting a very narrow, rigid label against the broad, nuanced reality of human achievement.
So, the crucial point is this: defining oneself solely by external validation or comparing yourself to others is incredibly detrimental to your well-being. Think about it. When we measure our internal worth using someone else's external yardstick, we are basically setting ourselves up for misery. We absolutely must avoid falling into the trap of letting society's constantly shifting standards dictate our own personal sense of value.
Which brings us to a much better path. Section 5, the balanced approach. If the aggressive winner mindset is way too simplistic and the passive victim mindset is just totally paralyzing, what's the middle ground? Well, the roadmap to balance is this three-step sequence. Step 1, strive for growth.
Step 2, embrace resilience. And Step 3, practice self-compassion. Let's break these down.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how it completely reframes the goal. It advises focusing on personal growth, continuous learning, and overcoming challenges, regardless of external outcomes. This is incredibly powerful stuff. It means you prioritize your internal evolution over external trophies. You're judging yourself on the effort, the learning process, and the friction you overcame, not just the final score on the board. Doing this, it puts the power entirely back into your own hands.
Steps 2 and 3 really work in tandem here, acting as the ultimate balancing mechanism. On one hand, you need resilience. That's the mental toughness to bounce back, absorb the blow, and learn from failure. But on the other hand, you absolutely must pair that with self-compassion. This means acknowledging that everyone, literally everyone, no matter how successful they might look on the outside, faces challenges and makes mistakes. It's a delicate balance, right? Pushing yourself relentlessly through a setback while simultaneously giving yourself the grace to just be human when things go wrong. And this brings us to the ultimate synthesis. We need to acknowledge the influence of external factors while maintaining a sense of agency over our own choices and actions. We don't actually have to choose between recognizing systemic realities and holding on to our personal power. We can absolutely do both. We can look at the board, see it for what it really is, acknowledge the very real obstacles that exist, and still boldly decide to play our hand to the absolute best of our ability. We've moved from a harsh, definitive binary to a nuanced, compassionate, and truly empowering framework for navigating life. We've seen that agency isn't about ignoring reality. It's about how you choose to operate right in the middle of it. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Knowing what you know now about the architecture of agency, the undeniable impact of uncontrollable factors, and the multifaceted nature of achievement, how will you redefine your own success today? Take that question with you and start building your own authentic architecture.